The following is a Mood Killer production. Welcome to the very first inaugural episode of Dynamic Teaching with KME. I am your host, KME. I hope you guys have been paying attention to the debates. They've been very, very interesting. And I don't know who I'm going to vote for yet, but I'm voting for someone. So this show is going to be about teaching, not just scholastic teaching, but just learning, education. We're going to celebrate teachers. So if I have a guest on this show that's not in the teaching field, we will still talk about teachers that inspired them to do what they do today. It's not going to be an NPR style show, and that's not a knock on NPR because I listen to all of their shows. I used to listen to Car Talk regularly, and I used to listen to Fresh Air with Terry Gross. I still listen to Fresh Air with Terry Gross. She's a little bit more mellow. I'm a little bit more, let's say, animated. But we're celebrating intellectualism on this show because anti-intellectualism is very, very real in 2019. And I want to show that being an intellectual is not a bad thing. It's actually a very, very good thing. As long as you're not judging others and thinking that you're better than other people, being an elitist. We don't want that, but we definitely want to celebrate our people in higher education because they deserve that respect. And in grade school education, every level we celebrate on this show. So my first guest is David Bernheim. David, or Mr. B, or B as he likes to be called, he'll always be Mr. B to me though, is a former acting teacher and English teacher. He was actually my acting teacher for 2 semesters at Farragut High School in Knoxville, Tennessee. This conversation, again, it was a lot of fun. We talked various issues about Army life because he's a former soldier, being progressive-minded and teaching in a red district. What were the challenges of that? We definitely get into that. We talk about a controversial event at Farragut High School where the Indigo Girls were supposed to perform, but it didn't happen due to, well, I'm going to call it right-wing fuckery. This is a very fun interview. Starts off a little slow, but around the 13-minute mark, the energy of the conversation goes up. This is my first conversation with Bernheim, my first oral conversation with him in over 20 years. I've talked to him, chat with him all the time on Facebook, but this is the first spoken conversation I've had with this guy in years. And we typically like to keep the conversations under an hour. I can talk to this man all day, though. I really can. But not talking to him in over 20 years, it brought back a lot of memories of drama club, all of my friends, and she shouts out a lot of students. So hopefully they're listening. Brian Bonner, Bone, Crystal Dover, Graham Case, all those guys, man. This was such a fun conversation. And without any further ado, let's get on script and talk to Mr. B. Joining me today is my former high school acting teacher, Mr. David Bernheim. Mr. B, David, what should I call you since we're 20 years removed from the high school days? What should I?
Just B. Just B.
B. All right, that's good with me. So, you're in Denver, Colorado right now, right?
Colorado Springs, but Denver's
Colorado
close
Springs.
enough.
All right, close enough. Yeah, adjacent. It's just like Anaheim, Los Angeles. Where, to me, it's the same thing, but people,
Sure.
Well, how long have you been there for?
We just are completing our first year here. My wife is currently active duty military, so this was our assignment, and we'll be here until the Air Force says otherwise.
Oh, okay, cool. So what branch were you in? Were you in the Air Force or?
Never. So my wife and I, no. I was in the Army back in the ancient days.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for your service for one. And how did you get into where are you originally from? Let me ask you that first.
I was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee.
Okay. Oh, so you're from Memphis. So you're a Tennessee native. So how did you wind up in Knoxville?
Well, we never take a straight path anywhere. The long story short, I guess, or the long story longer, I graduated from Christian Brothers High School in Memphis and went to Memphis State University, now the University of Tennessee at Memphis, and I was a music major.
Right.
And music education. And in my part time, I did search and rescue and worked with disaster services with the Red Cross, with the county, and I really got interested in that. So I went into paramedicine and worked on an ambulance, worked on the county rescue squad, and then decided I wanted to actually go back to school. So my brother was living in Matthews, North Carolina. I moved to that area to go to UNC Charlotte, where I completed my degree in education with an English minor. And while there, I discovered interest in the Army. I enlisted in the reserves. I eventually got convinced to go into ROTC by my roommate. I graduated and, actually, I was commissioned a year before graduation in the reserves, and in that same reserve unit, we taught basic training, and I went on active duty. I applied to go. I had a guaranteed reserve contract. I applied to go. I did that, and I did that for a hot minute, and it wasn't. I don't know. I'm taking a long way to get to what your question was.
No, it's all good, man. This is all good.
My wife was a staff nurse. She had enlisted in the Navy before we met as a corpsman. We met in college in Army ROTC. That's exactly where we met. We went on. I went on active duty a year prior to her, and we were new and
Okay.
and the things I did didn't really correlate to a positive home life. So I ended up leaving active duty and pursuing the reserves and National Guard, then the reserves. And during that, my wife was pregnant with our first child, and so I taught. It was there in Louisiana, right out, short drive from the base. I started at Anacoca High School. It was a 4-year high school with 287 students, 56 in the graduating class of seniors.
Okay, so let me ask you this, because I took you for 2 different acting classes. I actually went back and double checked my high school transcript, and I took you sophomore year, and then I took you junior year, I want to say. So, how did you ever have aspirations to be a movie actor or a Broadway actor or anything like that, or did you was teaching just where you landed? And because you Army teaching, not exactly related fields, right?
So it's funny you mentioned, I guess I was targeted early on at my house of worship as having perfect pitch.
Oh.
So I started singing at an incredibly young age. My first theatrical role was with children's theater. Cookie Ewing was the theater director there in Memphis at the old fairgrounds, and our theater was an old World War II Quonset hut. I was in The Adventures of Tom Sawyer.
Oh, okay.
And so that was the very first play I was ever in. I was 3 years old. And Chris, I continued acting all through school. In fact, I really didn't want to go to CBHS as my high school because all my friends who did theater, musical theater, went to White Station. It was a public high school in our same area. And at CBHS, they only did a fall play and then a spring musical. And I frankly wanted more. I left all that to some degree, with the exception of the singing I was the only non-professional that sang with the professional choir at our services. So I did that for years. And I continued that even when I was doing the emergency medicine role. I taught in Sunday school, so I had been a teacher. It was in our family DNA that all of us end up giving back to our community and teaching in the religious school. So my parents did, I did, my brother and sisters did. It was just what we did, and that really resonated with me. So when I looked at college, I always looked at an educational aspect, an undertone. So I was a music major for music ed. And then when I went to UNC Charlotte, I used my talents with my tuba to help pay the bills. So I played in the pep band for the basketball team, and I acted in the theater. And I was in theater education for probably 2.5 years. And my advisor dropped the bomb on me and said, "Oh, you're going to be it's a 5-year track." And so I had taken enough English credits to graduate. And so I transferred my major to English ed. And I really thought that I would be teaching English. At my first school in Anacoco, I helped with the musical, but my responsibility primarily was I was the freshman English department by myself. I taught all 3 classes of freshmen, and I taught 1 class of business English to the seniors. When we moved to North Carolina the following year when my wife left the military, and she wanted to go into nurse anesthesia. And there was a program in Winston-Salem. We targeted it. I went there. Long story short, I thought I had a job, and I got there, and he had given the job away. So I worked selling outdoor advertising. I worked for a company that created signs for businesses. And
I did that before. I worked with a billboard company where we were cutting billboards, and I don't know what the hell they did. I guess posted them as billboards, but man, I hated that job. But
I just didn't like it because even though I was incredibly good at it and rose quickly to leading in sales, I didn't like that it was a one shot, one close type of operation. You didn't build a relationship. You were about getting the Benjamins and getting out the door.
Right, yeah.
I did, though, learn a lot of neat things while working there, and it carried into education and helping youngsters, because the concept that they operated with was you needed to knock on 16 doors. Out of 16 doors, 4 people would invite you in. Out of the 4 people that invite you in, and you turn on your light, your demonstration thing, you would get 1 close. And it's an interesting parallel with my students, because obviously in theater it is an unloved entity, unfortunately, across most of the nation in public schools, which is where I was teaching at the time. And unlike the military, who has no need to run a bake sale for jet fuel, we had to find creative ways to fund our program. And I would encourage students to knock on doors, to create a program that was advertising based so that we could fund the theater. And, it's all about, and especially kids who were auditioning, you're going to hear no more than you hear yes.
Yes, exactly.
So anyway, that was that direction. And we hopped, once my wife was an anesthetist as a nurse, we ended up hopping from job to job because she was working at a time when they were transitioning from using anesthesiologists in the heart room for doing that type of surgery to using anesthetists. And my wife was one of those that was trained in that area, and she was highly sought after. And we ended up coming to Memphis after North Carolina. We were there for 3 years. My family was still there, and every reason that I left Memphis in the first place as a young man was still there when I returned. And I found it a poisonous environment as I watched each of my siblings' relationships fracture. And so we got out of there in 3 years and went to Knoxville. And I did my own business for a bit. I did medical billing. And then I wrote for a magazine that ended up going defunct, not because of me, but I wrote for Tennessee Sport and Fitness Journal. Okay. And one of our neighbors from Memphis, the son was attending UT, and our family was very much involved in water skiing and teaching adaptive aquatics in the Knoxville area. And his family decided to move from Memphis to Knoxville to retire. And when they moved, the daughter, you probably know her, Crystal Dover.
Oh, yeah, I do.
She ended up coming to Farragut. And in, I guess it was July of 96, we were with her family at a pool out there in Farragut, and she said, B, the drama teacher just left the school.
Oh, that guy was a dweeb, man. I don't remember his name.
I'm not going to mention his name. I respect your memory and vision.
Yeah.
I think I see it through a different lens.
Right.
And regardless, the position was available. So I'm just going to leave that whole topic for a minute. But
this is why I like you as an acting teacher. I went to Farragut Middle School. I moved from Los Angeles to Knoxville, Tennessee around the 7th grade. It was right after the Los Angeles riots. That happened in 92.
Yes, sir.
My family wanted to get the hell out of there, so we moved to Knoxville, Tennessee. At first, I was kind of excited about it, and then I got there, and then it took me a while to warm up to that place. But I didn't have Vicki Wells as a teacher, but as far as like an academic teacher, I think she taught English or something. I had her as a acting teacher, though, because she did acting on the side. So after school, I had her as an acting teacher, and she really made me appreciate the art of acting, not just the like glitz and glamour of, oh, I want to be a movie star and this and that. She did that for me. So then when I got to Farragut High, and that the guy who shall not be mentioned was teaching acting, it really just kind of, it wasn't the same. And that doesn't mean he's a bad guy or anything. It's just I dropped the class really fast, and then I took you sophomore year, and you were not like an easy teacher or a pushover. But one thing I loved about you is you saw things in me that I probably didn't see in myself, as far as like just the craft of acting. And I remember you when it's funny that you say I was that you had the auditioning process. You talk about how rigorous that is, and you get a bunch of no's before you get a yes. When you said that back in those high school days, if you're going to pursue acting, it's going to be, it's not going to be some easy cakewalk thing. But what I liked about you is that you made me, and I think for any student that's taken you that was in drama club in high school or anything like that, that your approach made us appreciate the craft, so even if you're going on these auditions and getting a bunch of no's, you still love the work you're doing, and you're not getting frustrated that you're not getting famous magically, right? So I wanted to give you that credit for that. You and Miss Wells, the combination of both of you.
Well, and you're right, and I can't speak to any fellow peers that teach theater. The reality is, it takes a lot of sweat equity to be successful,
right?
Or it takes a almost magical sense of luck,
right? Yeah.
And I'm not saying that they're not lucky people. I'm not saying they're not people who are born into the industry who possibly have a leg up on getting in a door. But Broadway is littered with people who are talented but not disciplined. And the reality is 1%, less than 1% of high school students who take a theater course go on to make a living in it. And I would have, for me, Chris, I would have been remiss if I had painted any other picture that someone is going to make a solid living doing this. The reality is it's going to take an incredible amount of work. And for most of us, it takes an incredible level of no's.
Right, yeah. And yeah, you were just very good at getting us to the serious students to appreciate the art behind it. The acting teacher, a couple other acting teachers that I had, I always got this sense that they might have felt they should be in Hollywood or on Broadway, and that was a job for them, not something that they necessarily wanted to do. And I never got that impression from you. I know that you genuinely love the job. And I also, another thing I appreciated about you is you were very good at like, you were very nuanced in the way you treated us. You treated us like students, but you also you talked to us on our level as well. You weren't like, we didn't approach you, and it wasn't like, oh, I'm the great and powerful Mr. Bernheim, listen to everything I say. You gave us that wiggle room for a little kickback, and challenged us in a lot of ways. We challenged you a little bit, I hope. And
of course,
it was a very awesome symbiotic relationship. And anytime I talk to any of those people from back then, like Rachel Dunn or Josh Myers or any of those people, they've got a very fond appreciation of you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I used to tell people, and I did not rest on a great deal of training to, and I obviously didn't teach every perfect piece you needed, or someone else thought you needed. I had the opportunity to write the curriculum with some other wonderful collaborators as an incredibly young teacher in North Carolina. I guess I was recognized for jump starting what was a dead program when I got there. 15 students in the theater in a school with 2,400 people. And we had a Broadway level stage that went basically dormant most of the year, except when it was rented out. So my goal was not to, I don't know, this is where I bump heads with an inordinate number of teachers. My goal was that y'all own whatever you did.
Right, yeah.
And so, truth be told, I used more leadership traits from my military days than I did from necessarily a teacher's manual. So we would have morning production meetings before school in my office, and we would have forensics meetings at lunch, and I empowered the students to run it.
Right, yeah.
And I ran into conflict with people who wanted to make it something it's not. I agree that the experience is supposed to be positive for students. The difference between me and probably a great number of my peers, especially in the modern world now that we're in, is I think there's true value in failure. And if I had taken it from y'all, in my mind, and made everything successful by having an adult in another part of the school actually do the work, I don't understand what learning you really would have had. You would have been a button pusher if you were doing sound. You would have been a curtain dragger if you were backstage, but you would not have had the challenge of creation and adaptation to take an articulated vision from the director, make it personal to you, bring it back to the group, make it collaborative, and then put it on. The drawback, Chris, is there were times, and there weren't many of them, but there were times where, in spite of the scaffolding offered, I can remember a production at R.J. Reynolds High School that completely fell flat. Everything you could possibly imagine that could go wrong did go wrong on opening night. And I seriously wanted to sit on I sat on the steps, the bridge that went over the orchestra pit, and I was crying. I wanted to give the money back to the people who came.
Right.
And so at Farragut, you guys owned a lot of it. And yes, there were mistakes that were made, and sometimes there were mistakes that I had to take it on the chin in an administrator's office. But most of the time, the students rose to the occasion and gained an incredible amount of knowledge leading. So I used to joke with you guys, and I don't know if you remember this, but I said I'm an okay teacher at theater, but I'm a hell of a teacher of responsibility.
Right, yeah. And I do remember that, yeah.
So the goal was, if 99% of my students are not going to make a living at this, how can they be better, more rounded, successful humans and appreciate the arts later? And rather than have you appreciate it from a distance, I had as many of you as possible be engaged in a variety of elements, because we had a variety of elements that were offered there. We did an improv show that literally funded our forensics team. And then we had a forensics team where every kid's the star, speech and debate for those listening who don't understand. And then we had the theater program. So, and we did more than one show a year. We had a freaking season of shows.
Yeah. I wish I would have participated in that forensic stuff, but I did like I actually have the scar on my and you probably don't remember this, but we were building a set on campus for a play, and there's some piece of wood or something just cut my hand like
wow.
right on the wrist, and you guys were like say go to the doctor, and I didn't or whatever. But I still have this scar from that.
Oh my gosh, that makes me sad, Chris.
No, it's all good though. It's not like a horrible scar. You have to, like, I have to show it to you for you to see it, but it's definitely visible. But yeah, like I remember just the those building sets and stuff, because I did a lot of that. I didn't do any plays. You were trying to push me towards one play that I wish I would have did in high school. But I don't know where the hell my head was in high school, but it was a Master Hallie and the Boys.
Oh my gosh, Master Harold and the Boys.
Harold and the Boys, yes. And you were trying to. It felt like you wanted to kind of do a production of that, and you were steering me in that direction. I really do wish I would have. Gotten it wasn't that I wasn't excited about it, but I was in high school, so I had girls and parties on the weekend and all that kind of crap in my head, and wasn't really ready to take on such a responsibility or whatever.
It's just an incredible piece of literature.
Yeah.
My students and I read it in North Carolina at Reynolds High School, and it was part of our curriculum. It was a class that we read, and then we'd do scenes from it in advanced acting class. And I never produced that play because when you bring a play to a bunch of high school students, you as the teacher have to be able to have at least some sort of vision if it's within their grasp. And
right.
if you have the people to functionally do it.
Right,
okay?
Yeah.
So you can't bring a musical if you don't have the voice that's going to sing the lead. You should park the musical until you have the kids in the room. Right. And I'll be honest with you. I don't know if you've ever taken the opportunity to see the Matthew Broderick.
No, you showed it to us in class. That's the thing. You showed it. You gave me the play before you gave it to anybody else. And then you showed then later in the semester, you showed that in class with a play with Matthew Broderick, and I forget the other actors' names. They're good actors as well.
No kidding. Zakes Mokai and John Caney? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, great stuff,
they're
man.
Kind of good guys.
Yeah. So anyway, so now I have to get into the more controversial questions, but this isn't. If you're a woke person, so to speak, this really shouldn't be that controversial. But is it possible to be a Trump supporter and a quality educator at the same time?
I have no doubt that there are a number of educators who have a conservative background. And do I think it's possible? Of course I think it's possible, because Chris, I avoid the teacher's lounge at all costs.
Especially at Farragut, probably, right?
And I'm not going to throw darts. My Farragut experience is what, almost 20 years removed.
Right.
I mean, next year it'll be 20 years. It's 19 years ago when I left the place. So
Okay.
I I do think that there are people who can believe that. I would tend to believe that a lot of, I think you would probably have more administrators lean
Right.
that direction. And I'm an administrator, or I was an administrator myself. Uh,
Right.
I just I just have a different view on the lens. Um, the thing is, Chris, and you may remember this because in teaching speech and debate, politics came up often in
Yes.
our group at Farragut,
Right.
and I did everything I could to keep my voice out of it. I let the conversations go when I
Yeah.
could. I capped them when I couldn't. And where I tried to show folks how to be woke was to hand them plays like Master Harold and the Boys
Right.
and to
Yeah.
read them in class and to talk about how that was an incredible piece of literature that actually was based on true events in
Right.
Athol Fugard's life and the apartheid in South Africa. So I tried to make people have a different lens in their eye camera. But to your exact point, yes, I think it's possible. And in the same breath, I can't how I can't I can't judge a fellow teacher because they're narrow-minded.
Right. Okay. So when is the last time you were in front of the classroom, Mr. B?
I was well. If you're talking Harley Davidson, I teach for Harley, and that would have been 2 weeks ago.
Okay. So what like academia?
Okay, that would have been 2016, 2017 in Goldsboro, North Carolina,
Okay.
um, at a high school called Goldsboro High School in Goldsboro, North Carolina.
Okay.
Uh, uh, Public high school, 99% free and reduced lunch in the
Right.
student body. Basically, not shown nearly an equitable amount of love as the other schools in the county.
Okay. I asked you that to get to this. Okay. Um. I've always been a student of politics, even when I was in my wild and crazy high school days. I've always followed politics. I wasn't a fan of Reagan. I wasn't a fan of H.W. Bush. I really wasn't a fan of W. Bush. But this Trumpian era that we're in is a very, very different level. Because when I started my teaching career roughly 8 years ago, and it used to be pretty easy to teach middle of the road with political science for me. It was an easy thing to do. With this joker we got in office now, it's not it's a different, because like I teach in the Los Angeles area, and I have a high concentration of Latin American, like Central American students. So from like El Salvador, Mexico, all those kind of places, right?
Yes, sir.
And I can't be middle of the road on Mexicans come to our country and rape our women. I do not know how to do that, right? It's
Right.
just, that's something that I wrestle with. Is I can't pretend that this stuff is normal, and that's kind of where like as an instructor, you don't want to be too partisan with the way you teach, because you want you want your students. And some of them are grown, are pretty grown, like older than me, a few of them, but most of them are like 18, 19, 20. You want to give them the room to think for themselves, but at the same time, I can't have them thinking, go back to your country is normalcy on any level at all. And that's kind of one of the things that I'm going through right now that maybe you didn't necessarily have to go through.
No, I disagree with you that, the challenge is, like you said, you want to course correct somebody when they have a different thought.
Right.
The challenge I would submit to you with that is you can't tell someone what to think.
Right, exactly. And that's never something. No quality good teacher is going to try to do that.
All I can do is try to scaffold experiences that help open your aperture.
Right.
If you refuse to look through the glass or you refuse to grow, I have to chalk it up to a character flaw.
Right. So did you ever get any kickback when you were at Farragut for being too progressive, too liberal, too this, too that? I'll ask my next question after I give you a chance to answer that question.
I think you may have missed that the Indigo Girls came to
Yes, that was the next question I was going to ask you. I swear. Do you remember that Indigo Girls fiasco where they agreed to have these ladies come to the school and sing a few songs, and then because of Jesus Christ, man.
So I think you missed my involvement with that.
Yeah, I remember it well. Now now that you bring it up, I remember your involvement in it. I remember Jubin's involvement in it. I remember all of it.
So the Indigo Girls were supposed to come to another high school. Another theater teacher had actually orchestrated them performing a benefit concert. Now listen, benefit concert. It would cost the school a dime.
Yes.
And it was a benefit concert. I can't remember the charity involved, but our school was very much involved in that charity. That's the piece I don't remember. And so when this teacher at this other school that will remain nameless, it was a friend of mine who was teaching the drama program there, or a person who had become a friend. She let me know that they couldn't do it. I went to administration and said, we can have this. We can fill the auditorium.
Yes.
And we will have this concert and our charity will be filled in one night. Our bucket will be filled in one night. So it was agreed.
Yes.
And I called the front team for the Indigo Girls. We set it up, and then the storm unleashed.
Right.
And the biblical environment around that school erupted at me.
Yes. I do remember that.
I got called into the principal's office and was castigated for that. I thought it was a narrow focus.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was incredibly insensitive. And here's the thing, Chris, this is the part that you may not have any clue on. So when I took over the program at Reynolds High School, I was still participating in the reserves, and there was an inordinate amount of confusion upon the kids in the classroom that here's this guy teaching me literature, performing literature in front of me, and he's wearing a wedding ring, but I'm wondering if he's lighting the loafers.
Right.
So it's not a mindset I haven't encountered before. If you Google my father's name under homophobia, my father would probably be listed first in Google. So it did not matter what show I was in or what show I performed. It was always, are you, or who is? Now, he asked me one time, if I was, and I took him straight to his hotel, and I didn't speak to him for a year and a half because I felt like if he had to ask the question, he was an idiot. And the funny thing was, I am and always have been straight, if it's anybody's business out there.
Right.
But the funny thing was, I didn't want him to come see that show because I was a dancer in the show and my character was gay.
Right.
And the cast in this summer stock show, it was me and one other guy that were the straight guys in the whole show. The rest of the cast on the male side was enjoying a different lifestyle.
Right.
And I made the mistake when I found out from my mom that Dad had come and was in the theater. My cast members were like, "Why is your hand shaking?" when I was putting on makeup. And I said, "The homophobe of all homophobes, my father, is here." And the funny thing was, Chris, they convinced him to come to the cast party, which I didn't want either of them to come to. And when he actually arrived with Mom, they were on him like saran wrap.
Right.
They were beyond his bubble. They were deep inside his bubble on his skin. And it drove him nuts. So when he got out of the car, he put 2 and 2 together and got 57 and said, "Are you gay?" And that's when I took his ass to the hotel and left him there. But So the reason I'm saying that, Chris, is at Reynolds, the very first day I would do 2 monologues for my students, and I did them for a calculated reason. I did a monologue from The Normal Heart by Larry Kramer, which is an incredible play about a couple who have AIDS, and one of them ends up dying and trying to get health care, and they dump the guy in a dumpster in New York City. And Graham and Bone ended up doing that for forensics and did an incredible job with it. Brian Bonner and Graham
Case. I remember both of them. Yeah.
But I did the monologue, and I did a monologue from what was the other one I did? It was a Nazi monologue, I think, from Kinder Transport. And I would then tell the students, number one, I did a monologue of a person who is gay for a reason, because it's acting. Just because I accept the character and understand the character's motivation doesn't mean that I am performing my truth.
Right, yeah, that's
for the Nazi, performing the Nazi character with me being Jewish is, one would think, is damn near abhorrent, but the point was to get across to them, you are acting, you are not accepting that character's reality. You are accepting the character's reality, you're not accepting it as your reality. There's a separation.
Yes.
And so I would try to teach that from Jump Street when I was in North Carolina. Now, when I met you guys, I did something very different, and I crawled through the auditorium as like I was a secret agent climbing over seats trying to find the president's plane. And that was the first day I met the vast majority of you.
Right.
And again, it was to show nuances that are different. But the thing about Farragut was there was an incredible amount of talent in the space.
Right.
The problem
there really was.
Problem was, like in every high school, there were only a couple of kids comfortable in their own skin, and the rest of them were letting others dictate where they either were in the pecking order or what they believed or didn't believe, and who they were, because that's part of adolescence.
Yeah. And
unless you're incredibly comfortable.
Yeah, no, and I think I was a victim of that too. The one thing I've noticed about being in my 30s, approaching 40 in a couple years, is there's a lot of bullshit that was ingrained in me, not just through the city of Knoxville, but through my mother and my grandmother, who you've met one time. You actually took me home one day, and I introduced you to both of them.
Yes, sir.
Grandmother's still alive.
You're lucky.
But they were so like just anti everything, like anti this, anti gay, anti this and that. My mom had me when she was 15, so I think that like part of the reason why she kind of went towards that route. But you have to unlearn a lot of that stuff when you get.
No, I look, who are you telling? I grew up in Memphis.
Right, yeah.
You know, Memphis is the location where L. Parsons was lynched and cut up and his body parts thrown in the African American communities. So yeah, I get it. I was in a lot of fights because I had a tapestry of friends, both in color and thought and mindset, and I was the shortest kid in school until I was a senior in high school. And when I was a senior, I was still one of the 5 shortest kids in the whole school. So I really didn't grow until college. I sat on a phone book to drive my first car that was actually mine that I paid for. So I get it. The thing at Farragut was I wanted to expose students to literature that was way outside their box. So you had, in keeping with what we were talking about, the Indigo Girls, I found myself in my principal's office more often than not.
Right.
The students wanted to do an improv. We did posters to invite people to come. And so one of the posters, pre-digital age, was it literally, not figuratively, it literally slammed every single ethnicity, every stereotype, every skin, religion, color, whatever gender, it slammed everybody, because my rule was if you were going to slam one person, you had to slam everyone.
Right.
And I thought it was hysterically funny, and it was a novel way to get people to come. I ended up getting in trouble for that, and I never brought that back to the students. I just said, we're going to go a different direction next time.
Right.
The thing with the Indigo Girls was not that I wanted to teach an agenda.
Yeah.
Now, that's what's really funny in all of this. I didn't have this desire to teach an agenda to students. I had a desire to expose them to characters that would make them reach, but were within their grasp.
Yeah, but I think that a lot in that area. And I get it some here, but I think people weaponize that word agenda to get to excuse bigoted behavior, right?
So, I don't disagree with you.
Yeah, like what somebody please tell me what a gay agenda is. No one's ever been able to like thoroughly explain that to me. It's been, yeah, well, you have to accept gay people, and what if you don't want to? Then live your life. No one is, like, people should be allowed to be who they are. That's right. Always been my opinion.
Denying them a service that you provide to every other person is no different than saying, if you'll pardon the expression, well, I won't go there. Saying African Americans or Japanese or Orientals are not welcome, or Jews are not welcome here.
Right.
You can't deny a service if you're going to hang a shingle out and say, I sell widgets, but I'm not going to sell widgets to you because you believe differently than me.
Right, yeah.
You can't do that, but that doesn't mean, and this is the part that just drives me nuts. It doesn't My problem with the baker in Colorado that refused to bake the cake for the gay couple, unless they're asking you to make genitalia, it's a cake.
Yeah, that's what I was like. Can you get somebody else to make the cake? I really thought that was like a narrow-minded thing for that baker, and I had a lot of people tell me that I was wrong, but I was like, this is discrimination. Nobody told you weren't making some like you said, you weren't making a sex cake or anything like that. So I don't know, but anyway.
So the point that I was making is, as we did other shows, as we did other things, the pursuit was coming up with the best character you could build on stage. I used to tell my students, and still tell them, the worst compliment a student can receive is, "That was good, Chris," for high school.
Right.
The moment someone hangs a qualifier on it, you may as well have just done number 2 on the stage and walked away. The only people who will applaud are your parents.
Right.
Because they'll comment to everybody, "It steams just perfectly. He did a great job." And, but nobody else will appreciate it. All they'll do is notice the smell. So my pursuit was in character development. The reason I'm bringing this up is we were invited by the city to perform a cutting of a number of our forensic pieces, and then that first year we placed 3rd with diviners in the nation, and they wanted to see some of that cutting. Well, I'm not a fan of cutting words that a writer puts into a script, but I will say that I don't know if you remember much about the diviners. I chose it for a reason, because I knew I was coming into a very religious environment. In fact, my principal at my interview made it a point to tell me I needed to be at the games on Friday nights.
Right.
And was that going to be a problem, which was a veiled way of saying, "I know you're Jewish. Are you still going to come?" And my response was, "Well, I'm going to back up our Sunday matinees for our performances to 10 o'clock, and I'm sure my administrator is going to be there." Right, sir?
Right. Yeah. I had a lot of issues with the principal. He's a public figure, so Edwin Hedgepath.
You had to do that, didn't you?
Yeah, I had to, but I had a lot of issues. Okay, so I thought they were very racially insensitive at that school. So there was a fight that I got into. It was one of the more famous fights, and the guy was being a little bit racially tinged with his comments, and it veered toward overt racial racism, and I got into a fight with him, and because I won the fight, I got suspended, and nothing happened to the other guy. And it was this, and then my mom went to the school and complained. She was like, "If you're going to suspend this, my son, you need to suspend both students and stuff." And then he tried to fight me again, and then he got expelled or whatever, but was still able to walk on stage and graduate. But it is what it is. But
no, I don't disagree with you.
Yeah. It was one of those situations where, like, I would continue to do stuff like that, and anytime I complained about any kind of overt or covert bigotry, it never got taken seriously at that
we are superior.
Yeah.
And don't touch our.
Right.
Brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
And our manifest destiny document said that this was ours. We continued to take. You know, I just got back from Rushmore with my wife. We went to Ellsworth Air Force Base, a friend of ours changed of command. And the audacity that you would not only, you know, we sent Custer to provoke them to break the treaty so that we could get the Black Hills because we discovered gold there.
Right.
Then we hire the asshat that made the Stone Mountain
to carve it.
to carve up 4 white guys in their sacred mountain in view of the reservation. You can't tell me that was for South Dakota prosperity. That was to keep the Native Americans in line. We own you.
That's the thing with this country. We're so emblematic here, and we hold on to these like monuments, the Black Hills, and what is Mount Rushmore is what they call it now. We hold on to the Confederate flag, statues. We want to celebrate this stuff. When you go to Germany or a place like that, they are embarrassed by all their past
treatment of the Native Americans at Bosque Redondo.
Oh, okay, yeah.
He quotes it.
Yes.
My wife and I went to Bosque Redondo, and you would think as we were driving down the road, I was like, I don't know if we're going to even be able to park. It's probably packed. And there were 2 other people there. No, there were just 2 other people at this huge memorial
Right.
to our sins. And you are absolutely correct that we don't approach it in the same way. When we took my dad to France because his family originated on his father's side in the Alsatian region in France, and we took him because we found some relatives through the internet in 2004, and we went. And while there, my youngest daughter was with us, and I wanted to go to Natzweiler-Struhof, which is the only concentration camp on French soil. It's where they did the testing to show the Jews were the inferior race, carving up people who were alive. It's also where they imprisoned the French resistance prisoners and then lied about it. And then that was, their remains were actually discovered in the cesspool. So it's an incredible story. But the difference was, Christopher, buses filled the parking lot after the place opened. And school children were being educated because the state says both French and German children were there because it's mandatory. The study of that is mandatory. And they found out my father was bilingual. And so my youngest daughter was videotaping Dad as he was literally translating documents from French and German to these kids. And it was an incredible experience for her to grasp why we're Jewish, why Judaism is a thing. And you're right, Christopher, we don't do that here. And where I've bumped heads with other people is when I've tried to tell students who Emmett Till was and why that was such an injustice, and that the perpetrators were acquitted and then were never tried, and they actually were paid by Look magazine to tell their story where they told the truth of what they did. So horrible things. Who knows what school child knows about the massacre at Elaine, Arkansas? These things aren't taught. What about the massacre at Wounded Knee that the 7th Cavalry did just a few short years after the Little Bighorn? We don't talk about our nasty past. We want to say, make America great again.
Yeah.
Holy, are you kidding me?
Yeah. You want to pretend that.
What part do we want to go back to?
Yeah.
And it just is a head scratcher to me. I think it communicates the wrong message to any child, regardless of their ethnicity or gender or anything. It communicates the wrong message when your commander-in-chief wants to wear their morality, their false morality, on their sleeve. And I think it presents a wrong image. And it's sad because we need people of character, and God help us, we need term limits to keep the asshats from profiting.
Right.
They'll do what was intended when this whole thing was created, that it was intended that you not profit from being a congressman. It was intended that you served and the government maybe covered your expenses, but you went back to what you were doing after serving a term or two. Now we have an entire network where our country is no longer run by us. Our politicians are tone deaf to us, and they pull the lever on who's paying their bills at their home. And I just think that's anyway. I've gone way off the rails. Sorry.
No, you haven't. You've stayed in line. But okay. So before I let you go, I want to do a few word associations with you, and you just be as thorough as not, and then we'll wrap up here.
Okay.
So I'm just going to throw a few names at you, and you just say what the first thing that comes to your mind.
Sure.
Knoxville.
Narrow aperture.
Right. I visited a few times. It's gotten a little bit better, but it's still ways to go.
Yes, sir.
Farragut.
deeply devout Christian.
Right. Farragut students.
Talented, moldable.
Memphis.
Wow. Freeze-dried in 1960.
Trump.
Phony.
Acting.
Cathartic.
All right. Mr. Hedgepath.
I take the Fifth Amendment.
Okay. Oh, man, it was a joy. I could honestly talk to you all day, Mr. B, but thank you for this. I actually think you're the first guest. I have Vicki Wells I'm going to be interviewing next week, so I appreciate you and sharing your insights. And
You're incredibly lucky to have Vicki. She is a wonderful teacher and a good friend, and I think you're fortunate to have had her. You got her twice,
right?
And, I think that it would be.
Thanks once again to David Bernheim for being my first guest on Dynamic Teaching. Such an interesting guy, learning about him growing up in Memphis, transitioning to the Army, moving to Knoxville, Tennessee, and everything that he picked up and learned, and the knowledge that he passed on to all of his students, including me. Very, very great conversation. Make sure you guys are paying attention to those debates. Make sure that you vote come 2020. This is serious business we're talking about, right? You don't want to be sleeping on these elections at all. I would like to give a special thanks to my editor, my platonic life mate, Crystal Gordon. Thank you so much for the editing that you do. And I want to thank the Kings of Sports Network, Sunday Night's Main Event, Post Wrestling. Who am I forgetting? I'm probably forgetting some. The TCAT Network. Everybody who helps make this show possible, I want to thank you. And remember that knowledge in itself is not power. It's the utilization of knowledge where the power lies. Peace out.